Welcome, everyone. This is the January 2025 edition of AZBioPEERS. We have a wonderful panel here to give their insights on the JPM, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, which also coincides with the Resi Life Science Investor Conference and the Biotech Showcase. So to start things off, I'm just going to allow our panel to introduce themselves and provide some of their background in life sciences and investing. So Stan, could you kick things off?
Sure. Thanks, Dylan. It's a real pleasure to speak with everyone this morning. My name is Stan Mealy. I'm the President and Chief Business Officer of Aqualung Therapeutics. We're an immunotherapeutics company focused on treating conditions that are driven by inflammation and fibrosis. And in terms of my background, gosh, I've been in the life sciences industry for 35 years. I've been to the JP Morgan Biotech Showcase Conference for over 15 years now in various capacities. I think it's important that for public companies, I've tended to be more on the JPM side. I think the audience in terms of buy and sell side analysts, and when you're public, it's a much better forum versus the Biotech Showcase, which I've been more active with in the last 5+ years, is really focused on early stage life sciences companies, fintech, digital, diagnostics companies, definitely early stage therapeutic companies as well. So I think it's important to kind of ground yourself with where you are in the journey, if you're private versus public, in terms of which meeting you may want to attend, such as Resi as well. But as we get into this program, I'll share some other insights about the nuances of both and where you may want to direct yourself if you've never been to either of these meetings. But it's an interesting journey, and I'm sure you'll hear from my peers on this call as well that you just have to be thick-skinned and you have to be flexible as you attend these meetings because you're running all over San Francisco. But it's a lot of fun and a lot of deals are made, and I think it's the place to be if you want to try and introduce your technology for sure from an investee perspective.
Thank you, Stan. And Naveen.
Yeah, hey Dylan, thanks for having me here. Good morning, everyone. I'm Naveen Govind. I have several hats, but the primary reason I was at JPM was in my capacity as both an entrepreneur in the digital therapeutics world, as well as a venture partner with a early stage fund that invests in AI, IoT, and new methods of payments for health tech solutions. Just like Stan mentioned, I've been at it for about a decade now, and we were just talking about the evolution of how JPM has changed. Would love to share some of my experiences, and hopefully it will be of benefit to the folks on this on this call, I guess. I think from focus perspective, if you are anywhere involved in the cardiology space, like I have been over the past 2 decades, and kind of morphed into more of a cardio-renal or cardio-kidney metabolic space, we've been looking at various aspects of challenges as well as opportunities, and love to talk to you more about that. I think that we have a lot of headwinds, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I guess we'll let direct what kind of questions we'd be happy to address and talk about.
Naveen. And Pierre.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Pierre-Alexandre Fournier. I'm CEO at Hexaskin. We make software for clinical trials and remote diagnostics and medical wearables, which is the part that people know the most about Hexaskin. The smart garments we make for vital signs monitoring. This was my, I think, sixth or seventh JP Morgan conference. It's always fantastic to meet all these great entrepreneurs and scientists roaming around Union Square, talking about the latest discoveries in life sciences. So I think for every entrepreneur, it's in the space, it's definitely an event to attend. And I'm looking forward to share more about it this morning.
Thank you, everyone. Now to kind of start things off, I'm going to start with Stan. Now, as a life science company executive meeting with investors, what are some key strategies that you found in attracting and retaining investors at these conferences such as JPM?
Well, it's really for those who have never attended, maybe I'll just take a step back because I think it's important to provide context when you look at whether it's JPM or the Biotech Showcase. I'll just focus on those two. But if you've never attended either, both of those meetings have this established platform. It's like a partnering one platform in the case of Biotech Showcase. And it's a pretty efficient platform where it lists all the potential or all the investors who are attending. And then also whether it's a biotech company, it's a diagnostics company. It's pretty comprehensive, but I think it's the framework for trying to establish one-on-one, and it's really speed dating, right? You're looking at 30-minute face-to-face meetings with potential investors, so you don't have an extensive amount of time. But you use that portal. They typically open up a couple months prior to the meeting, and you have to fill out a lot of detailed information, upload your non-confidential slide decks, et cetera. And then you start the process a couple months in advance to try and really start to germinate some interest in your company, in the technology, and then you try and send one-on-one invites to whomever you can reach, right? And typically you have to query the investors to understand the therapeutic areas they're involved in. You don't want to waste someone's time if they're not interested in your therapeutic space. So it's a bit cumbersome, but that's step one. And then step two is just, I think it's really just about if you've already been talking to a pool of investors in the past, which in the case of Aqualung, we already have inside investors, then it's certainly to reach out to those because you always want to meet them at JP Morgan to try and give them an update as to your progress and are you achieving your milestones, et cetera. And then for those who haven't invested, but you've had outreach to them, anytime you're at JP Morgan, everyone's there. So it's an opportunity to try and have a one-on-one. And when I say one-on-ones, these types of meetings, as Pierre mentioned, you can be walking through Union Square and you'll see someone and it's like, look, you have 5 minutes. A 5-minute meeting with someone can really lead to a pretty significant outcome. And then, of course, if you're further along with other investors, you definitely want to try and again, I use the term germinate, but you really want to try and get those to lunches, dinners. And I attend as many of the investment banker events in the evenings that I can. I mean, even if I'm not invited, I don't care. I just show up and, say who I am. And then you just crash the parties, right? And I have made a ton of contacts and had a lot of good meetings with people just from attending all of the evening events. It's really a full day. You're up at 7, you're going late into the evenings, but every single interaction that you can have, and it's just exchanging business cards, but you're out there to sell your company, to sell your technology. So it's like you can't leave any stone unturned. So that's, I guess, how I would start at this point in terms of reaching and meeting with investors.
Thank you, Stan. And Naveen, I know you have history as an investor as well. So anything to add as an investor, what do you look for in companies as you're meeting them during these conferences?
Yeah, Dylan. So yeah, just to pick up from where Stan left off, just for context, when I started my first entry into JPM was as an entrepreneur, running a digital therapeutics company. And for young startups or folks that have not been initiated into the JPM world, it started with my my law partner from DLA Piper. So, just kind of Stan alluded to all the receptions and meeting people. It's always beneficial to have one of your support folks from one of your functional teams, whether it's finance or legal or accounting, to be able to kind of assist you if you have the opportunity to make contacts and be introduced to folks at JPM. That goes a long ways to not having to wait in line to attend meetings and so on and so forth. From an investor perspective, since the post-COVID days, I've been involved in early stage funding. It's companies at the very early stage, and again, purely in the areas that I mentioned earlier, in the cardio, kidney, metabolic space, digital health being one of the more focus areas. This year has been a little bit of a shift, I would say, as opposed to prior years. Just again for history and context, JPM has primarily been a big pharma type of event, um, also supported by a lot of the public market folks, the capital markets, big financiers, and so on and so forth, looking for rough diamonds that they could pick and polish and take it to the next level. Uh, Secondarily, there was a medical devices focus where a lot of folks would come in from the device side, whether it's diagnostics or implantables and so on and so forth. But there was a perceptible shift that took place, I would say, the year before COVID, sometime around 18, 19-ish, where digital health started to take hold. And what really changed the game there was, again, following the money. Reimbursement was a big focus. We were all lobbying for different types of payment mechanisms to be put in place for the adoption of technology into the space. And when pharma and med devices started to move a little bit more towards the digital health side, that's been a lot of a movement, at least from my perspective. It's fascinating to watch it, but also presented a lot of investment opportunities. We were able to look inside out, find a lot of folks that were innovating around the space, whether it was wearable devices, whether it was clever algorithms that could look for artifacts in your blood vessels and so on and so forth. And we kind of looked at that and said, this is a very unique opportunity. So let me fast forward to this year. I think this year has been a very unique year. I think there has been a significant shift to include, especially AI, hogging a lot of the conversations, and very, very interested to see from an investor perspective. Again, I was participating as a judge on a women's health panel for a fund that's a very women's health focused fund. I was also on a medical devices pitch judging panel at Resi, and I would say about 80% of these pitches did address or talk to folks about AI in some way or another. So I think that was a significant shift. I think the second thing that we were looking for was, uh, you know, I think we've barely been a week into this sort of new administration, and a lot of chatter has been about what tariffs would do, what would happen to regulatory strategies, and I think we can talk a little bit more about that, but it can be this could be either a very, very painful conversation, or it could be really what I see as opportunity, where you can take advantage of shifts that are taking place. But I think it's also very specific to the DNA of the investor to figure out, is this your cup of tea, or how would you approach these? But I can talk a little bit more about. I think I probably had leading up to JPM, even prior to Thanksgiving, probably about close to 300 pitches that came my way. And I think we kind of sifted it down to approximately about five-ish or so that at least that landed in our sort of focus and sandpit that we could work with. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but let me give Pierre a chance to weigh in on some of the questions. Then, yeah, I think we can circle back to this and possibly take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And yeah, Pierre, could you provide some of your context as far as strategies that you found as a device company?
Yes, I think on our side we have a slightly different approach. One of the reasons is that we work with pharma companies on clinical trials and we serve that market. So for us, JP Morgan is not just an opportunity to meet with investors, potential acquirers, but also it's an opportunity for partnerships and to meet clients we've been working with for many years in terms of collecting digital biomarkers, clinical endpoints in clinical trials. So it's kind of a mix of all that. Um, so of course, you need a lot of preparation. Like Stan said earlier, this is a show that you need to prepare months in advance. Ideally, when you have a lot of meetings where it's not your first conversation. Ideally, it's an opportunity to shake hands and close deals that you've been working on all year. But what I like a lot about JP Morgan is the serendipity of being able to just meet people in hotel lobbies and cocktails in the evening and randomly meet new people that you would never have access to otherwise. Some of these investors are very hard to reach. There's a lot of international investors coming from Asia, Europe, the East Coast, of course. So it's probably the best networking event of the year in the US, in the whole country. Yeah, so I have many other things to talk about the trends, the funding and M&A environment and regulatory environment, and of course, like Navin said, the new administration looks like it's going to bring a lot of changes to the industry. So I would love to have maybe the other ones start talking about that. But one thing I'd like to mention is that the last 3 years have been particularly challenging for young companies because funding has been very hard for the past 3 years. It looks like it's coming back. So I think right now is a good time to start a company. And if you're a company that was founded before COVID and you're still alive today, the landscape is completely different. There's a lot less startups to compete with. There's been consolidation. There has been companies who had to shut down in the last few years because they couldn't raise another round. So what we're seeing is that we're going to enter a unique M&A environment in the next few years on the device side, because there is appetite for acquisition and growth right now. But the normal pipeline isn't there because the past 3 years have been a 20-year low in terms of funding companies and M&A in general.
And yeah, so now I do want to move towards kind of some of the emerging trends or kind of areas of innovation that we're seeing. So Naveen, could you kind of provide some insight as to these emerging areas of innovation that you've been seeing in the life sciences, especially as it pertains to early stage companies?
Sure. I think the focus again has been primarily around AI and how to use AI in a consequential manner. And I think business models have been taken into account, whether you're doing any type of drug discovery, preclinical, phase one, phase two. And I think a lot of us are looking at pitches that show a little bit more insight into where those opportunities are, whether it is to speed up processes using AI, looking at efficiencies that you can get out of your delivery and manufacturing processes. And if you're looking at manufacturing any type of innovations in drug delivery, that's a pretty big deal. And coming to diagnostics or to devices, I think the same applies. It's a question of how you're utilizing whether it's an LLM that you're using to train a certain type of an algorithm to do some very specific things, or whether you're generally using the kind of the AI framework or the AI stack to help you achieve some level of efficiencies. And I think from that perspective, that conversation continues to kind of move forward. The novelty of what's happening is we always look to see what the FDA is doing, and I think if you look at the digital therapeutic space, the FDA has recently been on like a crazy spree where they've been, I think they just approved about 100 plus solutions that use AI in the therapeutic space. So that's a big area of focus. So I would say if there are young startups or folks that are chasing funding, having a story about how you're making a life, changing sort of solutions using AI. But more importantly, it's about following the money. I'm not going to see probably a pitch that doesn't talk about how you're going to monetize. We still live in a very much of a fee-for-service world. I think VBC models. Well, CMS is still trying to figure those out. Value-based care models for payments are still a very big deal. If your solution is not addressing a big problem or a known problem, and there's very limited opportunity, I think it's not going to be a long conversation. But I think if you are primarily having some kind of a reimbursement or a commercialization strategy, I think that would be really, really helpful. So I think you could cover a lot in an hour or so, but I think there's some very specific nuances as we're looking at JPM in particular, how that kind of pans out. So yeah, I think that's an answer to part of your question there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we always hear the term AI thrown around a lot, especially recently, and it will be interesting to see how that sorts to evolve. And Pierre, so you talked about using a conference like JPM to like seek your partnerships. And how do you kind of keep in mind with these key areas that are starting to emerge as you're starting to find your partners?
Um, well, if we want to talk about AI, I've been in the AI field for over 20 years, so I'm kind of glad of how things have turned out in the past 4 or 5 years. Um, it's interesting because you see AI in different places. There's a lot of application on the administrative side of things in terms of going through databases and offering direct to patient services as well. There are applications on the diagnostic side, which is mostly what we're focusing on at Takes the Skin, meaning you're taking data and then you're interpreting it using pattern recognition, pattern matching to provide insights, clinical insights about patients. And then there's AI in drug discovery, which has received a lot of money over the past 5, 6 years. There's still a lot of promises, not a lot of results yet, but there are good reasons to think that eventually uh, all the new AI tools that we have will enable uh, drug discovery and will accelerate clinical trials. But I think for now, in the short term, it's mostly on the administrative side and on the device side that you see a lot of things happening in AI, a lot of concrete things that can reach the market and affect providers and patients. Um, one thing that's interesting about a few companies like say Hexaskin is that we've been collecting data for a long time in clinical settings. And when we talk about AI, access to data is crucial because that's how you build models. So in our case, when we meet companies and we're able to say, that we have large amounts of data that we've been collecting over 10 years, and we're able to use that data to leverage it to develop new algorithms, to develop new digital biomarkers to accelerate the development of new digital biomarkers. I think it resonates with investors, with partners, with clients as well. So if you're in the AI field, I think this has to definitely be part of your story. What kind of data do you have access to? Is there data that you have access to that is unique to you that gives you an edge, or are you using, public data that your competitor have access to? Because if you're using open source models and public data, you better have an edge on the product side and how you offer it to the market or in terms of market access. So again, pitching to investors, partners, they have to understand why you're unique, why you're well differentiated, what's your edge. Create that emotion that they need to work with you. If they're looking for what you have to offer, they need to work with you and not one of the other companies that's there. So you have to be ready to get that message across very clearly and very fast. Like Stan says, because sometimes you just have a few minutes to make the other person understand the value of what you're doing, of years of work.
Yeah, certainly. And
Yeah,
Stan,
let me add to that. I think that's an important point and I think that this discussion really um, has a lot more meaning to it. You typically see a lot of very colorful sort of slides and pitches that gloss over how you're using brand new innovation or technology. So it's not just about buzzwords, right? I think when you look at some of these pitches, we'd really like to understand if you're using AI, let's get down a little bit more deeper into the more knowledgeable investor who would like to understand a little bit more and who's probably knows more than what they typically allude to. So, what framework are you using, for example? Are you using a model that is from a proprietary sort of a company, or are you using an open source model to train? So, from my perspective, I think as an individual investor, whether I'm an angel investor or coming in at a very early stage, I would look for more open source type of environments. And I think it leads to further questions because if you're using proprietary, I would like to understand what are those licensing factors that would probably affect your bottom line. Your unit economics model is probably going to shift quite dramatically if you were to use some of the compute frameworks that require some heavy infrastructure environments. So there's a lot more meaning underneath that than just saying, okay, I'm using AI for diagnostics or for developing an algorithm or training a model that is doing X, Y, Z. So there's those type of scenarios that I would encourage folks to at the founder level to be able to have a couple of slides to address those type of scenarios, and talk a little bit more about if that's the case, then how are you going to factor in changes to your pricing model? If this is a license or whether it's a SaaS or whether it's a device that's adopting AI, what's the overhead? I think we all know that in the traditional sense before the R1 story unfolded over the past weekend, uh, there's a lot of investment that goes into understanding how you're going to use the AI and if it's homegrown or whether you're going to be utilizing third-party resources to be able to meet your solution. So there's a lot of dependencies there that I would encourage folks look at, because that's what I think most investors are looking at from that perspective. The last bit of that conversation around just in this context is if there are sort of elements of a licensing model that is being utilized, it's a question of is it is it a taking into account, again, I come back to the reimbursement aspect of it. There's always a pull to think that from a founder perspective, my solution is great. I have great technology. It's very cool. But cool really doesn't translate into usable or payable. If folks are willing to pay for it, then yeah, there's a path forward to that. But practically, if there's a very limited path to commercialization, and especially monetizing that in the course of a longer sustainable model. These technologies, just being cool is not going to cut it.
Certainly, we can't just throw around the buzzwords without really having that true understanding, that deeper understanding. And AI is only as useful as the data that it starts with, right?
Right, right, right. And that's where I think we did get some very interesting pitches, and I think from our perspective, there was, I think, some comment about what is your definition of an early stage? So in my world, it can mean anything, right? I think in Stan's world, you're talking about raising 50 million for your early stage, or in some cases it could be 500 million, right? So in our stage, when we're looking at an early stage, we're looking at fundamentally having an MVP. We are not funding ideas, or we're not looking at pitches that show concepts or things of that nature. If there is an MVP and there's substantial kind of weight behind that, I think that's when we would have the initial conversation. Then it's the fund size. Are we doing very, very early seed stage, whether it's cutting tickets or giving up certain equity for a small portion, or writing large tickets, getting up to 500 million and so on. So it kind of varies depending on the solution that we are in. But we were able to kind of sift through all of that, and it takes a lot of patience to sit through multiple conversations, and having been at this multiple times, you kind of get into a kind of a routine, I guess, where these conversations become that much more appetizing.
Yeah, I would agree with Naveen in that early stage, at least on the therapeutic side, is anything from sort of seed stage to Series A, right? And that has, even in and of itself, a fairly wide barometer, right? Because it's somebody that could be looking for just a few $100,000 to sort of get some early preclinical work done, to someone that's raising $10 million as part of a Series A so they can try and get some of their IND enabling work done. So it does vary, but I think on the therapeutic side, a couple things to just keep in mind, whether you're early stage or even if you're in a phase 2 like Aqualung is, data is the prayer to everything, right? And I think what I took away from JPM this year is, look, it's cautious optimism, and at a macro level, there's so many things happening at the government level. Is there going to be more deregulation? What's going to happen with interest rates? There's a lot of money still sitting on the sidelines. We know the deals that were done in 2024 were certainly down. We're not going to get back to the 2020 or the 2016 levels. I think that's pretty clear based on at least the discussions I had with larger institutional investors. But that being said, I think there is some cautious optimism, because we have this massive patent cliff that's hanging. We're talking like $400 billion that's going to evaporate from big pharma between now and 2020 and 2033. Now, 50 billion is gonna hit next year. So the big pharma companies are looking to fill their coffers. but they're looking for products that are already through phase 2, or they're at the phase 3 where there's some sort of efficacy where they can come in, do the robust pivotal phase 3 trials and get to the promised land so they can quickly start backfilling some of the products that are coming off of patent. But I will say the other thing that's, and again, not so much from an AI perspective, because I think AI, certainly on the drug development side, it's going to accelerate early targeting. It's going to accelerate clinical development. And again, I'll defer to the AI experts on this call because I'm not one of them. But I will say that what's important that feeds into Naveen's comments about reimbursement, pricing models, et cetera, is you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if there is no value proposition from the standpoint, it can be the greatest therapeutic drug, but how do you intend to price it? Even if you're thinking of this and you're in a phase 1 early preclinical, there has to be already the NPV models that you're starting to develop that says, how much would this cost me to get all the way through a phase 3, 2 pivotal trials, if it's a new chemical entity, the hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to get to the promised land, and then how would you price it? And, there's this also shift that I've seen towards, and I think this term gets used loosely, but it's precision medicine, right? The use of biomarkers. But the goal here is to enhance the probability of success of your clinical trials. So phase 1, it's just going to be all about safety, and a phase 2A is pretty much safety, but you are getting some efficacy parameters looked at as you're trying to tighten up your dosing, PK, et cetera. But at the end of the day, precision medicine, to me, like the oncology world, has really, really cracked this code with all their biomarker utilization. They're very strict on who they believe is going to be the most probable to succeed on their drug. And I think that is beginning to have a ripple effect in not just the therapeutic area of oncology, but it just in immunology in general. The big therapeutic areas that were the focus for this year are clearly cardiometabolic, the big buzz about GLP-1s and who's going to compete with Lilly and Novo, and immunology is still very hot, oncology, and inflammation. I would say on the therapeutic side, those are still the bigger areas of therapeutic focus that I took out of JPM this year. And I think that if you're in those areas, that's great, but it's all about data, rigorous science, publishing your data. Don't just say data on file. The more you can have peer-reviewed evidence, the better, because all of these things feed into the ability for that investor to want to meet with you. If you say you have 10 publications versus I only have my data on file, if you're comparing 2 different companies, Naveen's going to tell you, look, I'm going to go with the one that has the peer-reviewed, rigorous data on hand. So again, I covered a lot of areas there, but I think I just wanted to kind of give a 30,000-foot overview of some of the nuances, again, focused on more the therapeutic side as opposed to diagnostics and devices.
Thank you. And certainly, and we do have an audience question that kind of pertains to data. Like how are we seeing AI change drug and medical device R&D?
So, I think the topic of data again is very, very important. I can't stress that enough. I would rather look at 10 patient data than looking at retrospective data, right? And I think if you're building your AI solution and using even 10 patient data may not be statistically significant. We prefer anywhere from 24 to 30 patients, right? Because that gives you a little bit of an insight into whatever your primary and secondary outcome measures you're trying to prove. I think that's kind of like the norm, if you will, from an investment perspective. So the application of that approach to let's say you're looking to find certain artifacts in your echo images, whether it's 2D imaging. You pick your imaging modality. And if you are targeting very specifically a certain area and your algorithm is behaving or modeling the behavior of a cardiac imaging specialist, for example, and I'm kind of using some late terms here, but basically what you're looking for is can your algorithm do something better than what 10 cardiac imaging specialists are annotating over a series of weeks. And if this AI can do this within a matter of minutes or a day or so, then you are in a completely different territory. And I say that because this is an area that is a little bit more mature, where AI has been successfully integrated into a lot of different types of monetizable solutions. So I think there's that aspect of it. So again, whether it is proving that your MVP is uh, uh, trying to assess some kind of a hypothetical problem that your hypothesis is trying to prove that, then I think we would prefer that you have uh, data that is uh, more meaningful than using retrospective data.
Certainly. And anything that you would like to add, Pierre?
But in terms of product development, one thing I'd like to see more is people using clinical databases to find opportunities and to, like Stan said earlier about oncology and precision medicine, identify patient population where you can really make a difference with your new product. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I think that the key is to be able to go through lots of data very fast and making sense of it. I don't necessarily think you need AI for that, but you need to be able to automatically process a lot of data, and AI can help. But in general, we're talking about computers and software. It doesn't have to be AI. And it's my position about AI in general as well. A lot of people talk about AI, but what we're really talking about is software that can automate certain tasks. And sometimes it's very complex AI. It depends on algorithms that we've discovered just a few years ago. But sometimes it's just, uh, computer science and math that we knew about 30 years ago, but we need to apply it to the right problems. I still think there's huge opportunities in terms of looking at data in a new way. And in the end, our whole industry is data driven. And if you look at your company, the product you're developing, the market, in the end, you should have something like an equation that contains the clinical outcomes and the financial outcomes of what you're working on, that demonstrates the value of it. And then that can get you investor money, and that can get you a path to market, a path to patients, and a path to value what you're bringing to the table for these patients and the providers.
And if I could weigh in, because there's a question, and I think it was just answered by Pierre, but Jan's asking about sort of the role and importance of economic outcomes as part of your whole data package. And we know HEOR on the therapeutic side is absolutely critical, right? But sometimes you're not going to get that data till you're further along in your clinical development. So I think you have to be somewhat pragmatic when we use, I don't want to use the term data loosely, but I think you have to look at data in terms of what's the FDA standard regulatory pathway, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Okay, then you weave in pharmacoeconomics in everything that you do, especially as you start getting towards your phase 3 clinical trials. That's going to be critical because that's how you're going to, if it's a hospital product, that's how you get it through the GPO. That's how you're going to negotiate with the BUCA, the plans, and the PBMs and all that fun stuff. But on the therapeutic side, let's just call it what it is. 50 cents of every dollar doesn't go back to the drug company who developed the drug. the majority of that's going to the PBM. So my hope is that that's where, from a regulatory standpoint, meaning the new government structure, they're going to hopefully, I think PBMs is an area that needs to be looked at because they're just taking too much money from the overall pie, and we can drive down costs. And then there was another question just about the NIH and stopping grants and everything. I think, again, my impression, having received over 30 million in NIH grants at Aqualung, I mean, it was the lifeblood of what helped us get to where we are today. Grants are not going away. I think there's just a temporary freeze in everything. It's in the Department of Agriculture. While the new administration tries to just get their arms around everything, there was a lot of studies and things being conducted at the NIH that were probably irrelevant or unnecessary. And I think they're just, everyone's trying to take a step back, recalibrate, look at everything. But it's not that grants are going away. It's just sort of a temporary halt. And they will get their arms around it. There will be a budget. But I think there's going to be stricter oversight as it relates to the types of studies that are being done. But I don't think it's, I don't think we should panic. I think it's just all of us just take a deep breath, realize there's a new administration. They're just going to try and get their arms around everything. So it should be forthcoming, but perhaps there's a little bit of a delay in the interim.
Yeah, I think they're waiting to have the nominees confirmed, and it's probably why so many things are frozen right now. One thing, I mean, I'm speculating here, but the nominee to head the NIH is not a scientist, he's not a doctor, he's an economist. So what I would advise people who apply for an NIH grant in the next couple of years is to make sure the economic justification for the research is well expressed in the grant application.
Yeah, I think that is an expectation that we will start to see more of is some of the focuses of the grant writing may change a bit, but the grants aren't going to be gone completely. And kind of stepping back, we kind of think of me, say that I'm a seed level company. I just spun out of a university. A lot of my funding has been in the grant world, and I'm thinking about going to my first JPM next year. And I'm not sure whether I should go to a JPM, a Resi, biotech showcase. How do I kind of handle all of that as I'm approaching my first year at these major conferences?
Well, again, I don't, if you're crossing that Rubicon to want to start playing with the sharks and go to these types of meetings, then look, I strongly encourage you. I think it's just make sure that you have a tight, non-confidential slide deck. You have a solid data package, and you have a proof of principle. And so I can only talk from a therapeutics perspective, because I think if you're looking for seed capital, typically it's not going to really happen from my perspective at this conference. This is a bit more starting with Series a minimum of a few $1,000,000. So you already have this proof of principle. And if you've received some previous grants, if it's an R42, hopefully you can get some of your IND, animal tox, small, large animal stuff done, right? You already have some preclinical data. You have a couple of publications. You're ready to move into a human phase 1 safety study. Then you're all of a sudden ready to say, okay, I need a couple $1,000,000, wherever I'm going to do this study. And that can be a small Series A capital raise. Fine, you sign up, get your list of investors. And there's lots of data sources you can acquire that from and start doing some outreach prior. But I think that to me is the appropriate time to start going, at least to the biotech showcase or Resi, because you have that proof of principle in hand already, and you're not just sitting there trying to ask for capital and you don't even know if it works in an animal model, right? I mean, you need to get through that point and have some proof of thesis intellectually and scientifically that before I would venture going to a meeting like JPM or Biotech Showcase.
Yeah. I think I would agree with Stan wholeheartedly. If you're a young um, company, it just depends on what life cycle you are in of your startup or your venture. It never gets old. If you have the capacity to spend $3,000 for 3 nights in a dinky hotel in downtown San Francisco, then it's great. I think that would be something that you would want to kind of consider. It may not be the best sort of venue for you, and not the probably the best way to spend your I guess your money there. But on the flip side of it, if you are interested in networking, I think it's a great place. And I would also add that unless you're in a certain role, whether as in the finance world or whether you're in a public company as an executive, going to the actual JPM conference is probably not going to be something that would benefit you. You probably would be better off uh, attending a lot of the events that Stan mentioned earlier through contacts or so on. So you don't necessarily need to get registered or permission to attend the event. All it takes for you at the very least is plan for it, show up, and then you just opportunistically go about it. There's the skinny way to do it. If you if you're an aggressive entrepreneur, I think that nothing's going to stop you. You're going to find mechanisms to meet people. You can again, Pierre also mentioned this. You could be hanging out at a hotel lobby, and you'll run into a whole bunch of people. As a matter of fact, I typically run into people at the airport. Almost invariably, somebody that's sitting next to you or flying to San Francisco. There's a very good chance that individual is attending JPM in some capacity or the other. So yeah, I would say plan early, know what you want out of it, and then just be prepared to figure out where you're going to stay because hotel rates just quadruple at that time. So it's always good to plan early.
Although you can stay at Airbnbs, which I've done the last few years on the cheap. So, hey, if you're on a
Yeah,
limited budget, it's a
yeah,
little bit better.
yeah, yeah. I stayed at the Hyatt this time, and at China Basin, and I was it was a very it never gets old, right? You always learn something. I learned that right across the street from me was a Taco Bell that was dispensing adult beverages throughout the day. So you learn.
My advice for someone who's very early stage is to go, but with very low expectations. And like the other said, Resi or Biotech Showcase. If I was in that position, I would talk with AZBio because you might get a rebate for these events and advice on how what to do. But I would go with very low expectations. I remember my first JP Morgan conference, and it was pretty much chaos. I didn't know where to go. So the first time is a learning experience. I think it's good if you go a little bit too early so that here you can go around, take a look, and figure out what it is, so that later, in a later stage when you go, uh, it's not your first rodeo.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I think that's very great insights for a lot of our early stage members. We have a last quick question. Am I better staying at home and using LinkedIn for networking instead of these expensive conferences?
If you don't show up, you're going to miss the boat.
Yeah, look, I think it's a combination of both. I'm on LinkedIn pretty extensively, and I think it's a very valuable tool. And a lot of my connections are investors, other pharma companies, biotech companies. But once you get to a certain point as a company, whatever area you're in, it's almost a rite of passage. I think you have to go. It's where all the major networking takes place. And while you may not sign a deal, okay, it's a foundation for every. It's a very, very important conference to attend. But as Pierre said, have low expectations. It's not like 98% of companies that leave there are not, actually 99% probably don't leave with a deal in hand, right? Very few deals are announced at JPM, but it's the follow-up that occurs afterwards, and then beginning those relationships, which can be continued to foster on social networking like LinkedIn. But look, if it's pure economics, then sure, you do the best you can through LinkedIn from a cold call perspective, but warm invites and then the face-to-face interaction is the key. No one's got Investors invest in people. You can have the greatest thesis in the world, but at the end of the day, until they shake your hand, it's very rare that any institutional investor or a family office is not going to put capital into your company in the absence of having an opportunity to at least meet you. I'll defer to Naveen on that, but I think, at some point, there's still value in the face-to-face interaction.
100%. I think the first part of the whole show is showing up, right? So shaking hands, having a one-on-one conversation always helps. And I think if you're planning, and as Stan said, this I think if you are in our world of healthcare, this is kind of like an event you certainly want to have on your to-do list. And I would say plan for it. I think also if you are at any stage where you're trying to raise any type of funding, I would say have an MVP. You want to be able to talk about your solution and where you're at before you even sort of talk about raising any type of funding. And between all of those events, whether it's Biotech Showcase or Resi, I think both are pretty good. It's just a question of managing your time. Resi is a little bit more, I would say, kind of like speed dating. It could get a little bit harrowing if you are new to it. So I would say, if you want to dip your feet into it, to start by going to the show and just kind of getting your feel for it initially, and then have a plan to kind of go about your understanding what you want out of it.
Thank you, everyone. And we're going to mention something, Pierre.
Oh, I just wanted to say to entrepreneurs, you're not going to understand where you fit in your industry, in your market, if you stay behind your desk. You can spend, 7 days a week on LinkedIn. You're not going to understand. You have to meet with your competition, with potential partners, with your clients. You cannot stay behind your desk. You have to get out.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. This was a fantastic discussion. I know that you are likely very open to anyone from our audience reaching out to you and, asking for more insights if needed.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think from my speaking for myself, and I'm sure folks would agree. If you are an Arizona-based business looking, for any type of a conversation, whether it is around investments or taking the product to market or collaborations and so on. Please reach out. I think we've been as part of my role. I'm very focused on trying to get the healthcare ecosystem that much more robust, shall we say, in the state of Arizona. So that's something that I'm very focused on. So please feel free to reach out if I can be of help.
We are definitely all working towards that. And as we close out this discussion, I just want to be sure to mention next month, in February 19th, AZBio has our Day at the Capitol, where we get to speak to our legislators. We get to educate them about the importance of the life science ecosystem. And then in March, on March 6th, we have the Flynn BioCapital Conference. So that's another very fantastic opportunity to meet the Arizona network of life science experts. We get to have these great discussions and learn a lot about how we can raise capital, build our businesses, and build the Arizona life science ecosystem. So thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank you all very much.
Great panel, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Take care.